To verify whether the prisoner was faking his death, the warden actually burned the soles of his feet with a flame. But no matter how long he held it there, the old man showed no reaction whatsoever. Satisfied, the warden ordered his men to dispose of the body. The guards wrapped up the corpse and figured they'd move it after finishing their KFC. What they didn't realize was that another prisoner had been watching everything unfold from inside a tunnel. A few days earlier, Mike had heard strange noises coming from his cell. He pressed his ear to the ground to listen, and to his shock, the floor began to rise. Mike stood there frozen, staring at the ground in disbelief. 3 minutes later, the stone slab cracked open and a hairy creature emerged from below. Mike was paralyzed with fear. Surrounded by towering walls, he had nowhere to hide. But then the creature turned around, and it was an old man with a head full of white hair. It turned out that John was also a prisoner here. He'd spent 5 years digging an escape tunnel, only to realize he'd been digging in the wrong direction. But John wasn't angry. Instead, he comforted Mike and asked for his help so he could see sunlight once again. Once Mike had calmed down a bit, John invited him to his cell. John's cell was much more spacious than Mike's. Besides a few pieces of furniture, there were quite a few books. John then proposed that Mike join his escape plan. If they just changed direction and kept digging, they could be out of here within a few years. At first, Mike thought it was impossible and didn't want any part of it. But when John promised to pass on everything he'd learned in his lifetime, Mike agreed on the spot. The prison opened its window slots twice a day, once in the morning to collect garbage and once in the evening to deliver food. The rest of the time, they could dig without worry. John cut off a small piece of his hair with a knife, struck it against a rock to create a spark, and used it to light a homemade candle. The two crawled into the tunnel and began their new excavation. During their downtime, John taught Mike all kinds of knowledge. The only thing they had to remember was to leave their meal trays by the window slot in the cell door. As long as the guards saw the trays, they'd go through their routine and never bother to actually check inside the cells. Over time, Mike not only gained a wealth of knowledge, but also picked up various martial arts skills. As the tunnel grew deeper, John finally made a discovery. He carefully brushed away the dirt and found plant roots. This meant they were close to the outside. Both of them were filled with excitement and anticipation. Mike hurried back to grab some better tools. But just then, the tunnel began to collapse. Mike shouted for John to get out, but it was too late. John was buried under a sudden avalanche of rocks. Mike pulled John out of the rubble, but he was barely clinging to life. Knowing he wouldn't make it, John shared his final secret with Mike. He pointed to a stone beneath the books and told Mike there was a treasure map hidden there. He hoped that once Mike escaped, he would find the treasure and use it to do good in the world. Before he could finish, John passed away. Mike barely had time to grieve before he heard urgent footsteps outside, and he quickly ducked into a corner. When a guard came to deliver the meal and noticed the tray was missing, he kicked the door but got no response. He crouched down to look through the slot and immediately knew something was wrong. He ran off to get help. Seizing the moment, Mike quickly covered the tunnel entrance and hid inside the passage. When the guards came in, they found John dead. They stuffed his body into a bag and tied it up, then went to notify the warden. At this point, all Mike could do was say his final goodbye to John. But then a bold idea struck him. He quickly tore open the body bag, dragged John's corpse to his own cell, and arranged it to look like someone sleeping. He cut off some of his own hair and stuck it onto John's head, doing his best to make the body look like himself. Once everything was set, Mike crawled back to John's cell. Before the guards returned, he climbed into the body bag and left the rest to fate. Half an hour later, the warden arrived with his men. He glanced coldly at John's body, eager to get this over with. Since the prison was on an isolated island, the only option was to dump the body into the sea. Meanwhile, the guard delivering meals came to Mike's cell and noticed the tray was still missing. He kicked the door but got no response. This time, he opened the door and walked in, only to find the recently deceased John lying in the bed. The guard knew something was very wrong and sprinted out of there. At the same time, 2 other guards had already carried the body bag to the edge of a cliff, ready to tie an iron ball to it and toss it into the ocean. Just then, the meal guard reached the doorway and shouted for them to stop, but he was too far away. The warden couldn't hear him, and none of the guards had any idea that Mike was inside the bag. Through a gap in the fabric, Mike spotted a set of keys. The moment the bag was thrown, he grabbed the keys and pulled the warden down with him. As soon as he hit the water, Mike slashed open the bag, unlocked the chains with the key, and swam desperately toward the surface. When he broke through, he saw the warden trying to escape. Without hesitation, Mike lunged at him and shoved his head underwater. The warden drowned. The next day, Mike woke up on a nearby island. Looking back at the distant prison, he couldn't contain his joy. He ran along the beach, finally savoring the freedom he had dreamed of for so long.